So which Space Marine chapters are tearing it up on the tabletop right now, and which ones are most in need of a helping hand? Let's talk through each and every chapter, and how strong they are in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd post an updated video for the strongest and weakest chapters in 9th edition. I did make a previous one of these the best part of a year ago now, but it was perhaps a bit speculative. Not many people had had that much chance to play games yet, being in lockdowns. Maybe people hadn't uncovered the true value of some codexes, and of course some of the codexes hadn't been released at that point. I feel like this list is far more accurate than the previous one, and I've tried to make it a bit more data driven as well, including a little bit of tournament data from 40k Stats Center. If you do want to look at the data, I've linked their website down in the video description. I really couldn't recommend it more for actually getting a handle on which sort of armies are doing well at tournaments. I've arranged the chapters into 4 tiers, starting with the weakest and then moving forward to the strongest. We'll go through each chapter, their tournament performance, why I've ranked them how I have, and some of their strongest rules that they can bring to bear on the table and good reasons to play them. I'm afraid down in tier 4 there's just the one chapter, Imperial Fists, which perhaps isn't the biggest surprise. The Imperial Fists were very strong throughout 8th edition, but basically seem to have been repeatedly kicked by Games Workshop. The edition change with more line of sight blocking terrain really didn't help gunline armies. A lot of their strongest units that relied on bolt weapons got nerfed into 9th, and for some reason Games Workshop even nerfed their super doctrine so it only worked on the heaviest weapons. I'm still not saying that they can't do well in the hands of a skilled player. They are Space Marines after all, and Space Marines are universally fairly strong throughout, but people really aren't choosing to run them compared with other chapters. Throughout 9th edition, only 12 players have chosen to run them at GTs, the lowest out of any chapter. They've got the lowest win rate with 33%, and since the last of the Space Marine codexes were released, there haven't been any top placings with Imperial Fists in grand tournaments. Really not great on the statistics point of view. In terms of things the Imperial Fists do have going for them, their chapter tactic is maybe the strongest. Exploding 6s on bolt weapons is great, a nice universal damage buff, and ignores cover is pretty nice as well. The Eye of Hypnoth can basically give you a lieutenant in the shooting phase for a single command point. They've got a handy warlord trait for rustling up an extra command point or two, and they do have some handy damage dealing stratagems including tank hunters and bolter drill, though both of these are a little bit expensive for what they do in my opinion. Compared with the other supplement books though, I really think that much of the rest of their codexes are underwhelming. Their psychic powers aren't so great, their super doctrine isn't terrible for an alpha strike, though it kind of sucks that it doesn't work for heavy bolters anymore, and their warlord traits and stratagems are largely nothing to write home about either. Definitely if any of the chapters are in need of a buff, it's the Imperial Fists. Moving on, we come to tier 3, where I've chosen to rank Raven Guard and the Black Templars, who again I'd say are slightly more challenging than most when it comes to competitive play. For the Black Templars, we do have a new codex inbound, so this is likely to change quite a lot in the near future. I'll most certainly review the Black Templars codex when it's out, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. I can't help but imagine it will improve things for the Templars. In general, 9th edition codexes do tend to come with a bit of a power boost. We also know that they're getting a fair few fun new units as well, which certainly can't hurt. In any case though, their tournament statistics do look a bit underwhelming. Again, very few people are choosing to play them, only 17 across 9th edition so far. Their win rates are kind of mediocre at 41%, and they only have one top 3 placing in grand tournaments since April. I think few people playing a faction at grand tournaments really does give an indication that they're not that sold on them, as people can and do hop around armies when they think that something works well. For Black Templars, I'd say their chapter tactic and combat doctrine are kind of useful, though not massively stand out compared with other options. Rerolling charges is okay, but the combat doctrine is a bit weak compared with the other assault chapters ones. That being said, the Black Templars do have really quite a lot of powerful tricks that they can play. Devout Push gives you some really interesting options with piling into combat. One of their litanies will give you a 5+ feel no pain type save. They can get access to that Crusader doctrine early and very easily with the Crusader helm. Crusader squads are very cheap indeed. At 15-point marine bodies, it's really easy to hold down objectives with them. And as buffing characters go, Chaplain Grimaldus is very efficient indeed, giving out those litanies and his own buffs. There really are quite a lot of interesting things going for Black Templars at the moment, it just doesn't really seem to be coming together for them right now. The other army I chose to rank in tier 3 are the Raven Guard. Again, very underrepresented in competitive play, only 16 players again, and the same as the Black Templars, they've got a 41% win rate and only one top 3 placing throughout 9th. The Raven Guard really are all about their movement and stealth tricks, and I'd say perhaps the biggest reason to play them competitively is getting infantry units where they need to be. You can deep strike any infantry unit for one command point, including things like Blade Guard, Aggressors, Eradicators, or Centurions. Vanguard veterans have a bunch of handy options, including Advance and Charge. You can pre-game move things for a devastating Alpha Strike, and put a unit all the way up the front of the board with Master of Ambush. Again, maybe to hit the enemy very hard with something like Eradicators or Blade Guard right from turn 1. I'd say that Raven Guard are perhaps fairly strong as successor chapters. I found their chapter tactic just a little bit underwhelming personally. A little bit of extra cover at range doesn't hurt, but it doesn't really synergize amazingly well with what they want to do. The doctrine for hurting characters can be really handy in certain matchups, but a lot of the time it could be almost useless. I guess it does incentivize you to bring a few more Eliminators or something. They are quite strong now. Overall, like the Black Templars, not terrible, but just maybe struggling to break through and get themselves noticed compared with other chapters. Moving up to tier 2 now, and now we're getting into the really solid stuff, chapters that have been performing solidly, taking plenty of events, and seem like really good options for building marine lists in certain ways. First up, we'll start with the Iron Hands, certainly some of the bogeymen of 8th edition, but really haven't been seeing all that much love in 9th until fairly recently, where they've taken a few top tournament placings in rapid succession. They've been played far more than Raven Guard or Black Templars, 40 players, and they're currently sitting on one of the best win rates out of any Space Marine faction at 54%. Their chapter tactic really is quite solid. A 6+ feel no pain everywhere makes the army just generically tougher, and if you want to run vehicles then Iron Hands really are one of the best places to do that. The durability helps, slower degrading helps, and they've got all manner of stratagems, psychic powers, and warlord traits all geared to helping vehicles and get more out of them. One near auto-include move for the Iron Hands is to make a character contempt a dreadnought, give it loads of firepower, and make it untargetable behind your other units. It can give you a lot of Volkites and missiles that the enemy can't do anything about. And they do have some really quite nice warlord traits, including target protocols, that gives you some extra damage output, and student of history to allow you to hit something in melee and then just walk away. Another really nice move is turn 1 drop pod Devastators, which Iron Hands do better than virtually anyone else now. Their Devastator doctrine allows you to move and fire heavy weapons with no penalty, and you also get reroll 1s to hit. It makes a whole clutch of grav cannons or multi-melters extra nasty off the drop. Perhaps their main weakness is not having all that much synergy in melee, though I think they do make up for it with their other abilities. Moving on to our 4th successive black-clad Space Marine army, we come to the Deathwatch. These guys really are having a bit of a similar story to the Iron Hands. They attracted very little attention when their codex dropped, and not that many people seem to be having much success with them. Now, over the last couple of months or so, again they've taken 3 top tournament placings in rapid succession. They've had 43 people play armies with them in 9th, and they're sitting on a nice 54% win rate, again joint best with the Iron Hands. I think maybe people needed a little bit of time to adjust to Deathwatch from their very different tactics going from 8th to 9th. In 8th it was largely all about melting people with close range special issue ammo, but now that's really gone to a fairly underwhelming choice, and it's all about maximising plenty of other things from the codex, in particular Deathwatch melee. They can make some really interesting mixed biker and van vet kill teams with Obsec, they can move forward very quickly and count as infantry, and a nice little skirmish units to combat with the enemy. They can build some good dreadnought castles with a 5+ invul save from their relic shield, and they've got multiple other good ways to buff them between their rerolls, the Tome of Ectoclades, the Volkar Patagon Auspicator, or putting a dreadnought back into the Devastator doctrine each turn with Brilliant Strategist. They are really quite flexible with their combat doctrines, being able to pick the order of them, and this genuinely allows you to build solid melee Deathwatch builds these days. Having Thunderhammers and Lightning Claws all go to AP-3 across the army really isn't bad. You can also have your scariest unit advance and charge as well, emulating the White Scars for 2 CP. Finally, they've got a 5+ feel no pain type power, making one unit incredibly hard to shift, and the Beacon Angelis can help deliver one of your squads right to the front line, teleporting a otherwise slow kill team forward on turn 1. It's really quite cool to see the Deathwatch having more success, and it'll be interesting to see if that's sustained over the next year or so. Next up we come to the ferocious melee of the Blood Angels, an army in which I'd argue their 9th edition codex didn't do an enormous amount for. In grand tournaments there have been 78 players over the year, so still get quite a lot of love, no doubt because they're relatively well supported and have their own distinct model range. Their win rate is fairly average at 41%, but they still have managed to pick up 4 top 3 placings since April. They do often seem to be an army that often look like an underdog that's turned up good. Currently I'd say that the Blood Angels codex is maybe a little bit limited, but what it does really well. Their chapter tactic is absolutely stellar with +1 to wound on the charge and +1 to advance and charge. It gets your assault units where they need to be faster and makes them hit incredibly hard when they do so. Extra attacks from their combat doctrine are only an added bonus. Sanguinary Guard are kind of an auto-include right now, you just get so much value for those 32 points. They're just a monstrously efficient unit, particularly when they're near a Warlord for full rerolls to hit. A lot of Blood Angels lists will have a unit or two of them and some Van Vets bounding up the field, maybe supported by a jump back Sanguinary Priest for some heals and feel no pain, and perhaps even a Sanguinary Ancient for +2 to move on the jump packs. I do quite like the Smash Captains they can build. I really like the Gift of Foresight Warlord trait. Rerolling a single hit, wound and save both makes them massively more threatening and also significantly tougher. It is just a shame that they have a bit less mobility and clever tricks than they had before. I certainly miss the Blood Angels 3d6 charge from Deep Strike and the old version of On Wings of Fire. Next up we come to the Green Dragons of the Salamanders. Again seeing a fairly average number of play and a fairly average win rate at 41%, but doing very well at breaking into top 3s with 4 top 3 placings over the past few months. Salamander's options tend to be all about raw damage and durability, and maybe the single biggest thing to attract you to playing the chapter is their amazing doctrine for +1 to wound with flamers and melter weapons. Basically, if you see anything in Codex Space Marines packing a flamer or melter, Salamanders will arguably be one of the better places to run it. They double down on that with some other powerful stratagems. +1 to wound on any core unit for a command point is often something that you'd be wanting to use every turn, and getting max shots and mortal wounds on their flame weapons as well can just add insult to injury. They've got a couple of interesting character builds. In particular, their super tanky Smash Captain on bike often makes the rounds, getting up to toughness 7, -1 to wound, a 2-up save with a storm shield, and often other tricks on top of that. Quite nice to have a character that's harder to take down than a battle tank. Their psychic powers are also pretty decent as well. Combining Fire Shield and Drakeskin can really make one unit ridiculously tanky, and it can be quite fun to use that tanky unit to shelter another unit behind it using their self-sacrifice stratagem. For weaknesses, I'd say maybe their chapter tactic isn't super standout, and they often want to be running slow units with not too much mobility, but overall I'd still say that they're a pretty strong all-round chapter if you do want to have an emphasis on melter and flamer weapons. Next up we have the Sons of Ross, who maybe do seem to be winning their melee rivalry against the Blood Angels. They've got more people playing them with 104 players, a 47% win rate which is very impressive, and decent performance at the high end of tournaments with 5 top 3 placings. In game, Space Wolves just bring an enormous amount of efficient melee might, +1 to hit in melee and exploding 6s with their doctrine are an absolutely great start, but they can also combine that with powerful combat stratagems such as getting that doctrine earlier, and a +1 to wound stratagem in melee if they need it. On top of that, quite a lot of people like to run Space Wolves as successors, combining the Born Heroes and Whirlwind of Rage chapter tactics, as that basically lets you double dip on the combat buffs, and you don't really need the heroic intervention all that much, as Space Wolves have a stratagem to do that on any unit anyway. For their own data sheets, I'd say perhaps their biggest strengths right now are the Wolf Guard and the Wolf Guard Terminators, both of which are crazily flexible units. The standard Wolf Guard getting the Lightning Claws and Storm Shields for cheaper than standard Van Vets, and Wolf Guard Terminators being incredibly flexible with their loadouts that they can take, combining interesting options like Storm Shields and Chain Fists, and Lightning Claws and Storm Bolters and Shields. Their Psychic is really quite solid with the Tempesters discipline, which can be another way of getting them into the Assault Doctrine early, as well as providing nearby Space Wolves cover as they move up. Finally, another near auto-include is the Armour of Ross. Having a character being able to guarantee fights last on a unit is just so handy when they get into combat. Maybe some of the less overwhelming things about Space Wolves are their unique units. Thunder Wolves are kind of okay, though I'm not particularly sold on Wolfen at the moment, and it's a bit annoying not to be able to take Apothecaries, which might work well with some of their lists. Overall though, a really solid army, and certainly seems to be achieving good results. Finally, last but not least for our Tier 2 armies, we come to the Ultramarines, whose tournament statistics do seem kind of interesting. 75 players have chosen to play them. They've got a fairly low win rate at 38%, but to be honest an incredibly high number of top 3 placings, with 8 top 3 placings since April, the third best overall out of any of the chapters. I think there might be an element of Ultramarines being the army that attracts quite a lot of newer players. They are the ones on the box art and everything after all, but the best players playing Ultramarines do seem to be having an enormous amount of success. I generally feel that perhaps Ultramarines, similarly to Deathwatch, are one of the armies that maybe don't have quite as many absolute standout strengths, just in terms of raw damage output and durability on their base stats, but make up for it with a crazy amount of flexibility and quite a lot of really nice to have options in game. Their Super Doctrine certainly pushes you a bit down rapid fire bolters and heavy weapons. Being able to move and shoot with infantry ones unlocks a lot of interesting options for play. The Seal of Oath is a really tempting pickup to allow you some full re-rolls against one enemy target. Squad Doctrines allows some nice combat doctrine manipulation on the cheap. You've got Warlord traits for command point farming, several useful characters such as Tigerius or Marnius Calgar, and their very nice rapid redeployment stratagem at the start of the game, where they get to pick up and redeploy certain units, stopping them from being alpha striked, or maybe getting them in the position to do optimal damage if you get turn 1. Very nice on forward deployment units such as Phobos units, or maybe those Invicta tactical warsuits. They might not have the raw damage or durability of some of the other chapters, but I still think that they remain very, very strong indeed. Finally, we get into the biggest and baddest Space Marine chapters around, and in Tier 1 I've chosen to rank the Dark Angels and the White Scars. First up, we'll start out with the White Scars, and their lightning fast, hard-hitting melee. They've been chosen to be played by 54 players, have a very good 50% win rate, and an absolutely whopping 9 top 3 placings, which is the second best overall, sorry not the third as I wrote here, and to be honest it's really quite impressive for the number of people who are actually playing the faction. I think that 54 players is actually really quite well represented for White Scars. They're not an army like Blood Angels, Space Wolves or Dark Angels, all of which with their own supported model lines, and even compared with some of the other core Codex Space Marine chapters, they're maybe just not quite as well known. I think so many people choosing to play them really is testimony to how good they are. White Scars are kind of exactly what you want in a melee chapter, get there ridiculously fast, and can hit you ridiculously hard when they arrive. Their advance and charge chapter tactic is really important in 9th edition. Being able to reach enemy units reliably is perhaps the most important thing, and it pairs very well with virtually every Space Marine assault unit, whether it's Vanguard veterans having a crazy 15-inch movement before they charge, biker characters or chaplains moving 20 inches before a charge, or even just boosting the threat range of relatively slow units such as Blade Guard. If you really want to lock in a ludicrous threat range though, you can also use their 3d6 and drop the lowest charge, which will propel them yet further and gives them quite a good chance of making a charge out of Deep Strike too. When they arrive, their assault doctrine is truly murderous, +1 damage on their melee weapons is just going to allow units to punch up far above their weight. Damage 3 Blade Guard or damage 2 Lightning Claws are going to be amazing against any multi-wound infantry and allow them to punch up against heavy vehicles. Their psychic discipline is really handy, again options for increased mobility, denying overwatch, and messing with the enemy's movement, and the Plume of the Planesrunner can again add +1 to your charges. Their warlords can be made extra fighty with multiple warlord traits such as Chigorian Storm, and you can particularly build White Scars Biker Smash Chaplains up to incredibly threatening levels. Finally, Kosora Khan I think is one of the best Primaris characters for his points. A very cheap captain that gives the enormously helpful combat buff of +1 to wounds, never mind his own abilities which are pretty impressive, doubly so when fighting characters. The Kylon bike's quite a nice alternative to a biker captain too. Overall, I just find White Scars an incredibly intimidating army to play against. I just love the amount of threat range and damage that they can have. Finally, last and by no means least, we have the Dark Angels, which I think many people have long seen as the Space Marine army to beat ever since their codex dropped. All their tournament stats are pretty good to be honest. They are the Space Marine army that most people are choosing to play with 116 players. They've got a decent 48% win rate, and they are the army that are winning the most tournaments with 11 top 3 placings. Between their Deathwing, Ravenwing and Greenwing, they really have quite a lot of viable builds that they can run, and they just flat seem to do a lot of tactics straight up better than many of the other chapters. First up, Grim Resolve is very handy for a +1 to hit, helps out your gunline units, and gives you a +1 to hit whenever your opponent charges you, as your units don't count as having moved in the opponent's turn. Each part of their super doctrine isn't enormously standout, but it's really powerful that they have a doctrine that boosts one part of their army in 3 different phases, first boosting Ravenwing, then their infantry battle lines, and then moving on to the Deathwing. They can also manipulate the doctrines really quite easily with their Brilliant Strategist, putting units back into the Devastator doctrine from Tactical. The Deathwing are perhaps the best Terminator force in 40k right now. They get OBSEC in their own unique detachment, they get permanent transhuman physiology, never being able to be wounded on 3s or less, and a squad or 2 slogging up the board alongside something like the Pennant of Remembrance for -1 damage is rarely going to be a bad move. Skating around them are the Ravenwing, having their 5+ invuls, really helpful stratagems such as pre-game moves, firing after advancing, and boosting their durability further if needed, and again many of their units can gain OBSEC if they do take their own detachment. You can make good plasma bombs with units like Black Knights or Inceptors with their +1 damage from weapons of the Dark Age. Their secondary objectives are easier than most, allowing you to defend your home field objective all game for a max points one, or just kill units with Ravenwing units while they move fast. And they've got a massive amount of strong characters as well, the infantry ones again only being able to be wounded on a 4 or more. Azrael provides his nice invul bubble and some command points, Ezekiel is a reliable caster for Enteromancy, the Ravenwing Apothecary can run around the board very quickly, setting up units from the dead, and Talonmasters can provide heavy firepower while safe behind your own units. And as I mentioned it, Enteromancy is incredibly strong indeed, allowing you to fight last, strip OBSEC, and remove auras from enemy models. Dark Angels just really seem to be strong on so many levels, and it's not hard to see why they're doing so well and so many people are playing them. Just for those interested, here's a bit of a breakdown of the stats of each army. These are all from 40k Stats Center, which I will link in the video description. I strongly recommend checking them out. The number of players and the win rate are across all of 9th edition, the top 3 placings are since April. So anyway, let me know what you think. Which chapter would you prefer to play in 9th edition if you were trying to win games, and which are the most intimidating to face on the other side of the table? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k content coming, with new videos out just about every day. I'm sure there'll be plenty more for the Space Marines coming soon. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which is what allows me to continue making so many videos quite so regularly. If you are enjoying a lot, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, an absolutely enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.